Hey, so before we get into this episode, I wanted to give a little context. This 27th interview edition of Music is Not a Genre is with an old colleague and friend of mine, Joe DeLuca. Before we got together for this, we hadn't talked in a good 25 years, so we had a lot of catching up to do. And I usually do the catching up offline outside of the interview context, but because so much of our relationship was tied up in the music work that we did together, a lot of that catching up happened during the course of the interview. Now, those of you who are just listening, you may already know that I do a video version of every single episode of Music is Not a Genre. And when I do interviews, I use the free version of Zoom because MxG is a bare bones operation. Hint, hint, if you subscribe to Patreon, I could maybe spring for the monthly Zoom subscription as well. But back to our context here. The free Zoom version, you may know this, has a strict time limit. It used to be one-on-one was unlimited, and now it's 40 minutes. So what I usually do is I schedule 2 40-minute sessions, which gives us an opportunity to have at least a good hour of solid interview time after editing. I take some pride in usually being very good at time management, but Joe and I got into it so much that both of the 40-minute sessions were cut off mid-sentence. I was able to edit fairly seamlessly the middle, but you'll hear at the end of our talk me rushing to say goodbye. It was such a great conversation that I then called him after, and we spoke for another hour. There were so many things that we didn't get to that I wanted to follow up on, so many ideas that he brought forth that I really wanted to unravel, that I think maybe a second interview is warranted next year. I don't know. So keep that in mind as you listen. Also, since Joe is a musician, engineer, and producer, I wanted to showcase his work more so than for my other guests so far. Anyway, so the structure of this episode will be a little different from other interview episodes. It's going to start with a song of Joe's, and then at the midpoint, where the audio version usually has a commercial break, there will be another song of Joe's, and then at the end, I'll showcase a song Joe and I worked on together, because I did quite a few recordings at his studio. So enjoy it. And if you think of anything you'd like me to follow up on with Joe, then sign up at Patreon, send me a message, and I will include your question in Joe's follow-up interview. Now let's get to the episode. I'm Nick DeMatteo, and welcome to Music is Not a Genre, the interview edition. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. Don't forget, you can support this podcast and my band Rec at patreon.com/music is not a genre. Quick break. This is a great time to get in at Patreon because my band Rec just released their brand new compilation album, Rec Collection, The Best of Rec 2007 to 2020. And not only do you get everything that people get on Bandcamp, you get so many exclusives, behind the scenes information and photos and things that no one else in the world will ever see. So please consider doing that. You can also support the audio version of this podcast at anchor.fm/music is not a genre. My public hub is youtube.com/Nick DeMatteo, or visit my website, nickdematteo.com, and sign up for the free newsletter where you can learn about all this. Don't have to hear me talk about it. And last and most important, please go to recarea.bandcamp.com. Rec is spelled REC, recarea.bandcamp.com, where you will get the new album and about a dozen other albums to boot, including some of the stuff that I recorded with my guest today, Joe DeLuca. Joe, and I'm pulling up my notes here because I did not prepare them. Joe is a producer, engineer, musician whose recent credits include Abstract Geometry by Kurt Bock and songwriter Jeff Ehling. Joe's been writing and performing for over 40 years. He owned and operated Why Me Recording, fabulous South Jersey studio from 1983 to 2018, working with well over 600 bands. He has 2 albums of original material, the self-titled Creamcicle Spiders and Mattson DeLuca's After All This Time. You can find out more about him at joedelucaproducer.com, and I will have all this information below as well. Joe, how are you doing?
Hi, Nick. How are you?
Okay, really good. It's so great to talk to you after so long.
Yes, the old days at Why Me Recording when we first met, and now here we are, 25 years later, and still alive and kicking.
Yeah, damn right. Still kicking and working. That's right, and that kind of goes into my normal first question, which is how do we know each other?
Well, I believe there's 2 angles there. One was, I'm not sure. We had this the same entertainment lawyer, Bernie Resnick.
That's right.
I don't know if Bernie recommended you to me to come record, or you came to me, and then we realized that Bernie was our lawyer. Like, it has something to do with that connection.
Okay.
So long. Is Bernie still doing work?
He is. I don't know what exactly, but I'm in touch a little bit with his wife, Sally.
Right.
Yeah, and it seems like he's still doing pretty much the same thing, more behind the scenes. Yeah.
I needed to do. He basically just did like a couple little contract things for me. If somebody, a record company needed something in writing, or a couple of the bands that I played in, he shopped for me back in the day, but that's been a long time. So I haven't really talked to him for a while, but he was a good guy. And I went out to dinner with him and Sally a couple times out in the city and stuff, and good guy, always full of information and getting right to the point.
Yeah, he was a good guy. Yeah, I should try and contact him again, see what he's up to.
Yeah, he popped in my head the other day too. I was thinking I was going to give him a call because he's probably still got the same number.
Oh wow, I didn't think of that. Jeez. Yeah, well, and I know I have his email address too. I should definitely look him up. And I forgot that he was connected to this. I was trying to remember, how did I first start working with you? Because there were some musicians I knew. I worked I was doing piano in the pit for this local production of Grease, and I kind of brought those musicians in to record an EP at your place, but I could not for the life of me remember how I was referred to you. So
yeah, I can't remember if it was a mutual musician or if Bernie hooked us up, or whether you just heard of the studio and just called me and I said, hey, I got time and come on down. That's what I do.
Yeah, yeah.
I know. I was trying to think of the same thing when we got in contact about doing the podcast, and I couldn't put it together either, except Bernie just kept popping in my head. So I thought maybe it had something to do with Bernie.
It's funny you should say popping into your head, because the older I get, I'm learning to trust those things, because sometimes something will pop in that seems like it's unrelated or isn't an answer or is just a tangent. And I realized that's probably the answer. It's staring me in the face. Like, why else would it pop up in my head?
Well, But one thing I do when I get those, whether it's a music thing or just a friend or, whatever situational thing, if I think of somebody, 10 years ago I would have went, I wonder how they're doing. Now I actually text them, like, it's just like, I'll just say, hey, how you been? Like, what's going on? Even if it's a friend, that I speak to on a regular basis, or, and for some reason they pop in my head, I figure I just had a sad story. I just had a friend pass away. If you look on my Facebook page, you'll see a guy playing a accordion. And my friend Kevin, he was a graphic designer, web designer, great bass player, trumpet player. He was heavily involved in the what do they call that? At that football game, say a bugle corps. He wrote music for bugle corps. Like, okay. He actually composed the compositions and everything. And he lived down the street from me, and he designed my first website. And years ago, he had come in with this metal band called October that I had been working with, and he was playing bass with them. And he had real long hair like mine at that point, and he was in full heavy metal, garb and all that. And it's like in the early 90s. And I mentioned that I had an accordion. I had a piano tuner that said, that he fixed accordion somehow, and he ended up giving me an accordion. So he goes, I play accordion. And we're all like, yeah, right. So I hand him the accordion, and he goes into this ripping version of She's Too Fat for Me, polka. It's a song.
Oh, yeah.
So we're all in the studio just cracking up. There might have been some smoke in the room, like, who knows? But sure. We're laughing. It was just like a funny thing. And back then there wasn't any cell phones, or, nobody videoed it or anything like that. So when I decided to move down to the beach in 2018, I was calling people, and I was giving away some gear that wasn't really going to sell, or items in my house. People were coming over. I was like, oh, do you like that painting? Take it. Do you want this? Because I was kind of minimalizing. So I called him. I said, would you want this accordion? He's like, well, I really don't have use for it. I'm not something I want to buy. I said, no, I just want to give it to you. So when he came down, if you look at that video on my Facebook, on my personal Facebook page, it's him standing in my kitchen playing the same song in 2017 when this all went down, when I started to get ready to move down here. And so back to the point of this is like, you just never know. I'm 62 years old now. A couple of my friends I've lost, and so when somebody pops in my head, I either try to text them or email them or give them a call or whatever. And I just think it's a good way to be as we get older, because, like with him, you never know. Thankfully, with all the great musicians I played with and all the great friends that I have, some of them, I just had a party at my house on my porch. And there was basically 3/4 of the people I've known since I was in elementary school.
Oh, wow.
People that you can't lie, and you can't, I don't know if we can say anything dirty here, but
yeah.
Okay. People you can't bullshit, because they know you since you were in like first or second grade. So I really try to keep in touch with them, and I'm kind of like the go-to guy to have the party, or to my old house that you were at where the studio was. Yeah. Awesome. Was that place, and it continues down here now. I call it the porch parties. I even have one of my friends actually got a wooden sign made, and it says, my porch where my dysfunctional friends get together. And there's a chalkboard at the bottom of it. People can write stuff. So every time people come down, they write stuff on the chalkboard, and I have pictures of different things. Like the last time, two of the girls that I'm friends with since first grade wrote, I don't like to be told what to do unless I'm naked. Yells for John Lennon lyric on it when they were here one night. And so I have it in my living room, because I don't keep it outside because of the weather. But it's really cool. So I think it's important for us to keep in touch, and I run into people, like I'll be on the boardwalk in Ocean City, or I'll be like walking around town down here in Ventnor where I live now, and somebody will go, Joe? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, you recorded my band in like 1987. And that memory is like etched in their head. And some people I actually remember, but other people I don't quite remember until they tell me what the band name was. And that kind of strikes a a key, and I can go, that was one of the grunge bands, or that was one of the hard rock bands, or that was one of the songwriters, or some wedding band demo that I did, or whatever. And it's interesting to just like run into people like that and keep in touch with some of those people. And Facebook has helped that, with keeping together with people and reconnecting with people like my cousins. Like my cousins I haven't seen in years. They live up in Yardley and all over the place. And now I know how many grandchildren they have. And we've actually met up. I was playing in a Heart tribute band, which I can get into a little later, for 9 years. And I was playing up in New Hope, and my cousin's wife got 6 of my cousins and their siblings, or not siblings, and their spouses, and my aunt, who's still alive at 92 years old, my mom's last living sister. My parents, everybody's gone. And my aunt came to the gig at 90 years old. This was like 3. So so without Facebook, I don't even have their phone numbers, until now. So I just think for me, it's always been important about relationships. And I believe music is all about relationships. And I believe owning a studio is about relationships. And, it's just a part of my life, at least. I know a lot of people just have a handful of friends and they like it like that. I could call anybody at 3 o'clock in the morning if I was, not feeling well, or something was up, or I have friends that they moved to California, and they're all over the country, and I try to keep in touch with them on a pretty regular basis, because I just think it's important to keep those friendships, whether they were business at first, and then became friends, and then, or like you and I kind of and kind of lost touch a little bit, but we did kind of email each other every once in a while and stuff.
Yeah.
So I just think it's important to keep in touch, when that thing pops in your head about, remember that night at the studio, and I'll call that guy. Or my friend Brent, he lives out in California. I grew up with him. I worked at his grandmother's bookstore on the Atlantic City Boardwalk when I was a teenager, and I called him on his birthday, and I was talking to him, and we were just, we used to go to Maynard's in Margate back in the day, when the age was 18. And every time I happen to go to Maynard's, to meet somebody or something, I take a picture of the sign and I just send him a text with just the picture. And he writes me a story about the night that we were there, because he's a really good writer, even a veterinarian, but he's always been a really good, he should have been a novelist. He's a really good writer, and he'll write some crazy story that's something that we did one night, while we were at Maynard's, or at his mom's house, or at the bookstore, where I worked for his grandparents and stuff. And it's just really funny. So, and it's great to have those connections.
I agree. And it's funny you should mention that gig you did 3 years ago, because was it 2 weeks ago? I'm in a Beatles cover band, and it's with the Hoffner.
I read it.
Yeah, and so this was the first gig with this band that we had ever done in the Philadelphia area, and it ended up getting a lot of my relatives out and cousins that I hadn't seen in a long time. And then this former adult piano student of mine from when I lived down in that area, I hadn't seen in probably 22 years, and her daughter's like fully grown and the whole thing. And I think I taught her when she was 4 years old, And now there's a pretty good chance that my wife and I are going to go down and have dinner with them sometime this year,
There you go.
And it's because of the music.
Me having the house at the beach now, not that my friends are taking advantage of by any means, but they have like a really great reason to come down and spend the day on the beach and stay overnight. I got a guest room, they can crash, whatever. And I have these little porch parties, like I was saying. So it's kind of giving them a little more, like I see them a little more often, obviously more in the summer, but I do have a lot of friends that enjoy the fall and the spring down here, because it's beautiful. And so that's been nice, because my old place, I didn't have any neighbors. I didn't really know I talked to my one neighbor like 4 times the whole 38 years that I lived there. And there was on the other side, it was like 200 feet away. There was an older woman that lived there that I used to like pop in and check in and on, but it wasn't like in a development or anything like that. And then when I moved down here, I'm in close quarters, like my landlord's house is like 6 feet from mine, you know what I mean? And there's neighbors that live down here year round that I've gotten to be friends with. And it was an adjustment at first, but I really like the sense of community down here, and that I've gotten to be, I'm a pretty easy social person. So I got to know some musicians down here, and then know some neighbors from walking their dogs. And I have dog treats on my porch that I give to their dogs and stuff. And like just a change in life that I kind of, in the first month, having people walk past my sidewalk and being able to see in my house until I had to close the shades on that side of the house. But it's like I have like 5 or 6 neighbors on my street that are year round. So and during COVID, we looked after each other. We'd go to the store and we'd pick up things in quantity, and I would drop off a care package to one neighbor or 2 neighbors, 3 neighbors, and then the next day there would be cookies that my neighbor made with her daughter. And so it was much different than living where I used to live, even though I had the seclusion and I didn't have to worry about noise or anything like that, which it's not. This is just a mixing room that I'm sitting in, and I can cut, acoustic guitar and a vocal in my guest room. But I can't cut a drum set in here. I mean, I probably could in the wintertime because nobody's really down here, but it's not really that kind of facility, so it's been interesting to and I always wanted to live at the beach, and I'll get into why I sold the studio once you get to that part of the interview part. But
for sure, yeah.
It was, it's just neat to like have this little sense of community that I feel down here, because it's a little town. I mean, you've been down here. Like I'm working as a stagehand in the Union for Hard Rock and Casino and Tropicana and Boardwalk Hall.
Okay.
So I work on the weekends. My skill set got me into that, so I've been doing that as well. And I've been meeting, a lot of people doing that are, everybody. They're either musicians or they got some tie to music when they're doing that kind of work. So I've met a lot of people that way. So I feel like my landlady, who's here only during the summer, she comes down from May till like October, and her husband comes down the weekends. They call me the mayor of the street, because like I just have to be friendly with everybody, and they're a little themselves. But it's just funny that I just enjoy the town and having people in close proximity is something that I didn't experience like I did in Cherry Hill, where I grew up, because I was in a neighborhood, but when I moved into my house where you were, or where my old studio used to be, that was just pretty secluded on a main road, and I didn't really know too many people in the town itself, except if I ran into the deli or something, or
Yeah, very different life. Yeah, and for those people you don't know out there, Ventnor is a town in one of my favorite areas of the world, which is the Jersey Shore. Is very near Atlantic City, which is why Joe was talking about the casinos and doing that work there. But I remember feeling so welcomed in your place when I started working with you, that I can see why you'd be called the mayor. Like you're very easy to get along with, and you just seem like you're you. Yeah, I mean, you look practically the same, and you act the same. I'm sure I'm no life, probably plenty of changes and things like that. But it's a reassuring feeling to be like, that's Joe, and not to mention what you're doing, which is also a good thing.
Thank you. I mean, I kind of prided myself on, when I started the studio, I was recording myself, me and my old partner, Dave Kloss, and we were trying to get signed and everything. And when we bought some extra gear, I was working at a music store back in Cherry Hill then. And I spending all my paychecks on equipment, and we started, somebody asked me, hey, could you record my band? Hey, could you record my band? And that became like a sideline to us getting signed. And then once I hit my 30s, and the couple bands that I was in did showcases and stuff like that, and things didn't really pan out, I kind of stuck my head in my studio. And then Dave left the business in '93, and I always wanted to treat people in the studio as I would want to be treated as a musician. Like I wasn't trying to be that engineer that's clinical engineer. I wanted to get a vibe. I wanted people to be comfortable, get a good headphone mix, like, be calm with everybody. And, just, it was for myself too, because that's the way I am. I don't want to be in a stressed out studio environment when I have been, but I don't enjoy that when it's tense, people don't play good. People are arguing, you get, well, I always used to say it's 50% of the gear and 50% psychology of the session. You have to, like, zone in on who's the guy that, or the two people that really have the vision, and the other people, like the drummer that wants his kick drum louder than everything else. You gotta be able to talk him to a certain way, and deal with people's personalities. Some people are, they need a pat on the back, and the other people you can say, dude, that sucked. Can you do it again? Like, that really sucked. Can you do that again? And they can take it, where other people, if you say that to you, crush them, so you have to, that was my thing of trying to weigh people out as a producer and engineer of what I could say and suggest to them without causing too much friction. And I think that might have translated to you as me being, like, easy to work with, because I was listening to you guys, trying to find out what you want. My job is to make it sound like what it kind of sounds like in your head, and then also guide you to make it sound like that by the tricks that I learned over the years that helps you get to that point that the musician might not actually know when they come into the studio.
Well, and it's it works, because this is stuff that and I'll throw this in now because why not? And then we're going to go back a little bit. But I think I did 4 or 5 projects in your studio. And the first one was this one, which I never actually really released. It had the song standing there, and it was from that band that I met doing Grease, and they used to be a band in the 80s, I think, called the Chasers or something like that. I don't fully remember, but they were kind of the session musicians for it. And it was such a great experience. And listening back to material from over 25 years ago that can still sit alongside anything else that I've done since then. And my favorite being this one, Your EP, which was really, that was the one. You remember that? Yeah, this was the one that Bernie was like, this is what we're going to shop.
Yeah, I remember the cover. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And you played acoustic guitar in one of the tunes, Zuzu's pedals, and just there's a lot of stuff in there. And I was in another band called Ape Cafe.
Right.
I brought them in to do this, and then we came back and did the Ape Cafe stuff too.
I remember that.
And I did something with another guy that I collaborated on for songwriting. This guy named Mike Knowles, I think it was. And that might have been it. I can't remember. But I think the reason why I kept coming back was because you gave me the space, because I've got too much going on up here, and when I'm thinking of, the guitar part should do this and whatever, and I've got 3 harmonies going on and whatever else is going on, that I could figure all that out in a safe space and feel also like there was some guidance there, and not that you weren't just sitting back going like, yeah, whatever you want to do, man, that's fine, that's cool. Like you were always engaged and really kind of guiding.
Well, in my earlier days, I did work at a couple others. Well, I went to KJM recording school. KJM used to be up in Gladwin, PA, and I remember I was working at H.A. Winston's as a waiter, and I was reading some music rag, and there was an ad in the back saying, take a hands-on 24-track recording course. And at this point, I had, a 4-track recorder, like a real. And I thought, well, if I'm going to get signed and I'm going to be, getting a record deal, I should know how the big studio works. I really wasn't thinking about owning a studio. And I went there and befriended my teacher, who was one of the owners, and it just blew my mind, and that's when I came back to my house and started buying more gear. And I was like I said, I was working at this music store, and and people started asking me to record them, and that's how the hours and hours and hours and the 600 and something bands that I recorded over those years just flowered into that. You know, I mean, that really wasn't my intention. I really wanted to, you know, be on tour and be making records of my own material. And I still, like I said, I still chased that well into my 30s, but I was also really busy with many different genres of rock and hardcore and metal, especially a lot of metal down in South Jersey. And kind of, you know, took me to a place, you know, that I felt that, you know, after doing it for a number of years, I felt really comfortable helping people with their music and trying to achieve what they're hearing, you know, and trying to take that approach of, if I was this guy, like I didn't want to be, I had a couple, what I meant to say is I had a couple experiences where I went with bands I was in and we had some kind of recording time through our management company or something like that. And the engineer was just basically, was that good? Did you like that one? Like, no, like that was hard. I mean, you know, yeah, like I said, you have to be careful how you say it to who you're saying it to, but it was just like, they were just like hitting record and stopping and just going, did you like that? And they had, I don't know, I just didn't feel like they were interested in what I was doing, you know, or what the band was doing. And I was already engineering people. So I was kind of like grinning my, going like, oh, you're gonna let that slide. You're not gonna repunch that. I can hear a punch there. I can hear a noise there. I can hear the air conditioner blowing. Like, what? Oh, it'll be fine. Well, you know, that we'll fix it in the mix. Bullshit. You know, it's like, I always cut my tracks so as you were playing along, you didn't hear that mistake. I would fix that mistake right then. If you blipped a line or if you blipped a guitar part, let's fix it while we're here, while we got the tone. You go back 2 weeks later and you try to match the tone, you end up cutting the whole track again. Yeah. So I would fix as we went, and I wasn't, if you remember, I wasn't scared to punch on my analog machine. I would punch in little. Oh. Now it's so easy with Pro Tools. You just like punch it in and edit it. But you know, I thought, why would you want to hear, when you're working on material, why would you want to hear a crappy version, you know, of even if it wasn't EQ'd or if there was noise in the background, you know, like a fix it in the mix kind of thing. And it's not really making you play that good. So I was always trying to make the rough mix or the monitor mix or whatever you want to call it, the working mix, sound as good as possible. So you felt like you were playing to a solid track, you know, as you layered the other things on top, which I think made for a better product. And I mean, some of it was just dumb luck. I'm not saying that I was, you know, Eddie Offord or, you know, like, you know, some famous engineer. But I was like in the trenches is how I learned, like in the trenches of bands that only had $500 or bands that had like $2,000 or $3,000, you know, or $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, something like that on a bigger project. But I kind of learned under fire how to like do the psychological part of the session, getting the sounds, having the right equipment, you know, talking to the people correctly. And I, you know, that's why my place and my place was kind of like a middle of the road in the price range. So that was a good thing. There was like crappier studios that were like little, you know, had like 2 pieces of outboard gear and a 4-track reel-to-reel or something like that. And then there was like something like KGEM that at the time was like, or Sigma, that was like, you know, $100, $200 an hour and 2-inch tape. And I had a 16-track 1-inch machine, and it kind of made it affordable. So I was kind of like, I became, my partner, Dave Kloss, had a lot to do with it in the beginning. We kind of became that studio that everybody kind of either did their demo or did their demos or their release. And then when CDs came about, I started doing like some releases for labels and stuff, especially with the hardcore and the rock stuff, where a lot of stuff went out on 7-inch and 12-inch vinyl and stuff like that. And it was just a matter of, you know, being in the right price range at the time that people could come in and not really worry about the clock as much.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a valuable thing for musicians who, most of us don't have a lot of money, you know, to know you can come in and get some kind of quality, you know? Yeah, exactly. Pretty much. It's funny you mentioned Sigma, because right around the time that you started Why Me, which I wouldn't have known you back then, but a little, maybe slightly after that, I recorded a project at Sigma because my dad knew of it because he's been in the business for decades,
Right.
and essentially blew like every last bit of money that my dad had saved up for something. I don't know. He was so pissed at me for, even not for very long, but because he knew it was a passion project. But I was like, from that point on, I was like, wherever else I go, I don't want to feel like I'm on the clock.
Right.
I want to be able to afford it, but still come out with something good. Yeah.
Who,
Let's
who did,
oh, go ahead.
who did you work with at Sigma?
Somebody named Joe as well, but I can't remember his last name at
Uh,
all.
You didn't work with Mike Tarsia, the son.
Joe
Oh,
Tarsha. It was Joe Tarsha. Yeah.
you worked with Mr. Tarsia, the owner.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's who I worked with. Because that's who my dad knew.
Yeah,
Because my dad knew Bernie's boss, and Bernie's boss knew him, and blah blah blah. So
right. What was that guy's name? Lloyd Remick.
that's it. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Because I called Lloyd about a contract, and Bernie had just joined his firm, and he kind of, because Lloyd was so busy with bigger things, he kind of, shuffled me over to Bernie, which was good because I love Bernie. But yeah, Mr. Tarsia, I've done a few producer panels with, and he's, he cut all the OJs and God, Billy
Yeah.
and the spinners and then Mike, his son, was an assistant engineer and then became an engineer and was an amazing mixer. Unfortunately, he passed away last year. Yeah, and Mr. Tarsi is still alive. He's like in his late 80s. He's not in great health, but he's doing okay, unless I heard. And he's a very, very nice man. I had the pleasure of being on a producer engineer panel a couple of times with him about 10 years ago at the Cape May Singer Songwriter Conference. Such a nice man, and he told me about some stories about cutting the spinners and OJs and all the PIR stuff. And I worked at Masterwork Recording as a mastering engineer for 12 years, and we had all the masters there, and we actually digitally archived all the master tapes because they were getting old and falling apart. And we got to I did there was 137 albums between me and the owner, Pete Humphreys. We split them in half and did them when we had the old EQ notes from when they were cut to lacquer. So we were able, and still the same equipment. So we actually made the record sound like it was, and then took a little creative license. So I told him that we had done that, and he was interested in how we did that because he recorded all that stuff. So yeah, Mr. Tarsi was a really nice guy, and his son Mike was an excellent mixer. Like I said, he unfortunately passed away last year. Or he was young. I mean, he's not much younger, not much older than me. And I thought you might have worked with, when you mentioned that you worked at Sigma, I thought maybe you would have worked with Michael, but when you said Joe, it's like, man, you work with that was the guy, that was the dude.
Wow, man. Yeah, that was a hell of an experience. It was one song. It was just one song. Yeah, was it? Yes, and then I went back in 1990 and worked again with him, 90, 91, something like that. And I think that's when I ended up spending all my dad's money. But it was a great experience. Yeah. Now you said that you opened Why Me in 83?
Yeah, around there. I mean, we made it an official business in 85, but we had been, recording ourselves and starting to record some other people. And then a friend of mine who was my keyboard teacher growing up, who then became my accountant, said to me, you and Dave are starting a little business here. Why don't you open up a business? So we actually made it legit and, registered it with the county and all that stuff. And redid the room the way it looked when you were there. We kind of reshaped it because it was just really like a rehearsal room with a little recording room, and then we had a storage area which turned into the guitar area, and then the live room we cut the corner off of it, made the control room that 5-sided shape that it was. And probably how you remember the place. And that's how that started. It just kind of mushroomed from there. And there was like, I called it the trees. Like there was branches, like there was rock guys, there was metal guys, there was the hardcore guys that I did a ton of hardcore records. I must have did 150 hardcore records over the years, just from like 3 bands. Like it all sprawled out. They heard that record and they called me, and when I go to allmusic.com, it's all these releases of all this screaming, aggressive hardcore stuff that I didn't really know about that music. One of my guitar players in a band I was in was a teacher teaching guitar, and he had a student that was in one of these bands, and I said, well, they went to another studio and they weren't really happy. The guy was mixing it like a Tom Petty song or something like that. And they wanted the guitars loud and the kick drum loud and the vocal was buried and distorted. And so I just kind of listened to what they wanted and gave that to them. And then that spurred this whole gigantic thing. And, and like we said earlier, the South Jersey area with the Galaxy and all that stuff, I was doing all those bands that were trying to be like Cinderella and Britney Fox and all that stuff. They were trying to emulate that.
Yeah.
The typical, wedding bands and cover band demos that I did that as well. But, it was just kind of like the place to go because of the price point, like we discussed earlier.
Looking through suspicious eyes, heading for disaster, expecting more than I could ever give, disappointment sure to follow.
It's funny you're talking about like the hardcore stuff, and I know the second recording I did with you, this one, the band that I was working with at the time had a harder sound, and it was what I wanted, And I feel like it's one of the top, handful of recordings I've done that really did capture what I had in my head. And when I went on to another studio and then another, there were elements that carried through there because I learned them working with you in the band and that. But there were certain cases working with those other studios, other people, where it never quite got that beef that I wanted, that oomph. Like it took a while to get back to that place where I felt like that's the punch I needed that song to have. You always had that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just, like I said, I always tried to put myself in that musician's head, because I am, a songwriter and a musician, and I just tried to see what their vision was and then try to get it there as close as I could, without, sometimes you just had to tell somebody, look, it's impossible to bring the kick drum up that loud, or you can't have your guitar solo that loud. But that was my goal, was to try to have them walk out and say, for how much money we spent and working with this guy, he really did a good job. And I think most of my customers, I think were very satisfied with the results, budget wise, and for me getting into the project. And I would pick up a tambourine when they weren't there and shake a tambourine track. I would throw an extra guitar track down, or I'm a keyboard. I would play Hammond on a track for them. I'd say, hey, I'm hearing a little Hammond on the chorus here, and if they liked it, they liked it. If they didn't, we just take it out. But I was always trying to make the song better and make it, make them happy with what they were leaving with, because, it's everything to the band. I mean, it's this is their demo. This is the one they're going to get signed with. This is it. If I don't make it now, I'm going to have to get a real job. That whole. Yeah. I always say the young guys were easy to work with because they were enthusiastic and listened to you because they didn't really know. And what I call the midlife crisis records, in a good way, where the kids are grown and they have money and they come back in the studio and they're so happy to be there at 40 and 50 and 60 years old recording music. And it's the guys that were in their 30s that were like, at the end of that, we need to get signed on this demo, and this is. Mm-hmm. They were the ones that were the kind of the hardest ones to really get satisfied. It was never big enough. It was never, not never. I had to work harder to get it big enough and fat enough or whatever they wanted, because they were just having a little desperation kind of part of their life, because they were feeling like if this didn't happen, this probably isn't going to happen. And I've been there myself, so I know what that feeling is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's difficult. Oh boy, does it bring up a lot. I know that when the last project I did where I thought, well, I need this to be, I need to get, I was in my 30s, and once that didn't happen and I shifted into other things of filmmaking and stuff like that, but I really had to get away from it. And when I went back to making music, it was the first time that my enjoyment wasn't like blown by the angst and the pressure and the fear. I just could enjoy making the music for the music,
The two records that you mentioned earlier that I put out, this Creamcicle Spiders, is kind of like a heavy, like more like an Alice in Chains drop D tuning kind of thing with a female singer that I decided on at the last minute, and she did a great job. Mm-hmm. And that was done in the late 90s, and then I just remastered it.
Nice.
Out, when things became easier to put out on, and digitally, I put it out in like 2009 or something like that, and people really liked it. And then Bill Mattson, who's, he was in the Dead End Kids back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
And he's always been a great friend of mine. He's got a smoky, bluesy voice, and I've written some tunes, and we talked one night and we called him or something. He goes, we should really do something together. And I always wanted to do it. So I put that record together, and I kind of pulled a couple tunes from an old band, transferred them to Pro Tools, and then got rid of the original singer with his permission and redid it with Bill singing. And then we added more tracks to it. And then there were some new songs that I had done that he really liked, and that's the Mattson DeLuca After All This Time project. And like you were saying, at that point, I was in my 40s or 50, I don't know. And I just did it because I wanted to do it. It wasn't, I wasn't trying to get signed. I was hoping to maybe get some licensing or something like that from some of the stuff, which didn't happen either. But I'm still working on that. But it's satisfying to be able to do something, and I took as long as I wanted to, and it took he lives up in Lancaster, so it was hard to get him down all the time. And I had some really great musicians. Dave Kloss played on it, Ritchie DeCarlo played drums on it. I had all these great different soloists, and I played most of the rhythm guitars because I usually write on guitar, being a keyboard player, which is weird. And then added piano and all the other stuff, strings or whatever, and produce the stuff. And it was really satisfying to do something at that point where it wasn't desperate to get signed, and I was already kind of set in my life at that point, of owning the studio.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a value to certain kinds of pressure. It's kind of like the diamond, analogy, whatever. But I think that the truest version of somebody comes when there's no outside influence, when they're just, I'm doing this because that's what I think, I feel, I hear, and just for me, And I've heard that stuff. It sounds great too. I'm gonna make sure I put the links down for everybody to hear. That stuff that you wrote all of those songs?
Yes.
Awesome.
Lyrics, music, everything, like especially the Creamcicle Spiders stuff. I mean, there's layers of guitars to get it fat, and that the kind of grungy kind of thing with a lot of bizarre. The keyboards are not as prevalent in my normal stuff because I'm a keyboard player, but there's some more textural kind of stuff going on with that record. Then in the Mattson DeLuca stuff, there's a lot more Hammond and piano, and it's more traditional bluesy rock, compared to the Creamcicle Spider stuff. And a lot of my friends they're like, man, that Creamcicle Spider, what Karolyn, the singer, Karolyn Jordan, her name, or Karolyn DiAntonio-Jordon, she killed it. I mean, she really made the great. And I had a bunch of great people playing on that as well. So I was telling this story to a friend of mine. In my early days, I was in this band called Versailles. It was my first band, and we were like 10 years too late for prog rock. But we were doing that very bizarre, time signatures and stuff like that. And the other bands that I was in, that I was trying to get signed with and stuff, I was always surrounded by musicians that I thought were way better than me, like prolific musicians. But I was the main writer used on all this stuff. So like I got lumped into this thing where people say to me, "Oh man, like you're such a great keyboard player. You're such a," and I feel uncomfortable because I'm really, I know where to put my colors. You know what I mean? And I know how to do it. I'm not Rick Wakeman. I'm more of a Greg Allman, kind of slide it in there and get it in there nice. It's funny how being around the caliber of musicians that played on my records and played on some of my sessions too. I had them come in on sessions. I always thought people, maybe I'm not giving myself any credit, but I always thought people thought that I was a better musician than I really was. But I think it was the musicians that I worked with liked my material, and that was like, and my arrangement skills and stuff like that really was I guess that's more of my talent than actually being a virtuoso, speedster, knowing every scale. Like I just write the stuff and I'll figure out the chords later. Like I just found a chord on my guitar and I'm like, I don't know that that's a G minor 7 flat 9, or, that is minor 7 flat 9. How about that? Like, it's just because it sounded cool, and that's what I wanted that's what I was hearing in my head. So it's funny how I always kind of like, I ran into Reggie Wu, a good friend of mine who was in Heaven's Edge, and he was like, "Oh, you guys were like amazing," and all this. And I was like, "Reggie, I'm really not that good." It's like because I was around Dave Kloss and Ritchie DeCarlo and David Lennett and these people that I work with, and Craig Simon, and that made my song shine, which made me look like I was a better player than I really was. But again, I'm probably not giving myself, I'm being a little self-deprecating, but I always felt like that. I was just I felt like I was really blessed to like be able that caliber of musicians liked my stuff, and they wanted to be involved in the bands that I put together, which was flattering.
I mean, I think the truth's probably somewhere in the middle. Like you probably are better than you give yourself credit for, but being around people like that, the fact that you can do what you did among people with that caliber means that however you want to rank your virtuosity, you know what you're doing because you know your colors, when to play something, what to play, whatever the chord is, no matter how you end up classifying it later on, because your ear is telling you this is what goes there.
Right.
Well,
I think it was a production thing of years of sitting behind the console, doing that, and then dissecting records that I loved and seeing what it was. It just led me to that, and I was just happy that these people wanted to be involved with me. And the thing that Bernie was shopping for me, I met this guy through an old girlfriend, and he came in and I started producing his stuff, and he was kind of like a Lenny Kravitz rock and roller. When Donnie walked in the room, it looked like there was a fan blowing on him. He was a rock star. Bernie, I sent him 3 mixes. I went up to his office for a contract thing, and I had a couple mixes that we were doing of the record, and I gave them to him, and he immediately, I got home and the phone rang, and he's like, "Who the fuck is Donnie V?" And I'm like, "I want to meet him." So we met up at his office, and Donnie walked in with his scarf on and his hat and everything, and like he was shopping and stuff. Like Bernie was jumping up and down. Unfortunately, the guy had a abuse problem, and it never really panned out. But we showcased at CBGB's, Bernie set up a Continental York, and I really thought, I'm in my 30s with these guys that were in their 20s, and I was like, oh my god, this crazy guy, this crazy person, not crazy, this really talented, unique guy, after all these years, is going to be the guy that gets me a record deal, or a part of a record deal. Sure. And fortunately it fell apart because of his addiction problems. But
geez. Yeah. Do you feel like a lot of, just to refresh everyone's memory, you had your own studio for like 35 years or more, or something like that. Do you feel like during that time there were a lot of those kind of near hits?
Yeah, I mean, looking back at it, I mean, I want to say I enjoyed working with 95% of the people that I work with. There's a few that I could give or take, but not everybody was a star. But I treated everybody like the same. I worked just as hard. You actually had to work harder with people that weren't as talented. You know what I mean? Because you had to pull that performance out of them, and you knew it really wasn't going to get much better at a certain level, and you had to just kind of settle for it. And then I worked with some people that were just amazing that I thought were going to do great things. And, I worked with a few people that did eventually, maybe not in the project that I worked on, but like eventually did something else that got them to a different level. But it was, again, it was basically the price point in my studio and the people that were trying to, live the dream like we did. They were trying to get that to that level. And it was my job to try to get them to that level, and I took pride in doing that. That's all I could really say about that. I mean, I don't want to say anything bad about any of my clients, because everybody was great, and I don't think you'd find too many people that say, "Hey, Joe ripped me off," or Joe didn't job on my project. They're talking. I still run into people, like I said, and they're like, "Oh man, I still play my record and it still makes me happy, that I did that back, whatever." And it's you just said it to me, after all these years, saying thank you for that. So what really happened towards the end, besides coming out of a bad relationship, I saw my numbers starting to dwindle over like a 5 or 6 year period as technology got cheaper and stuff. And I just kind of saw the writing on the wall, and I was playing in this Heart tribute band, traveling all over and making some good money doing that, which was fun for about 9 years, as I saw this decline in the studio business and had a little debt happening and stuff like that. So I just decided, you know what? So I moved down here, and one of my friends, Andy Lawless, he's one of the best bass players down in Atlantic City down here, introduced me to a guy named John Mulhern. And he had a studio in a church that he was the trustee for the church. And there was an attic space, big attic space, that was in the back of, over top of a meeting hall, not in the church itself, but it was connected to the church. And 17 years prior, he had like built a studio up there. And so Andy introduced me to him, and we got talking, and it was like 10 blocks down the street from my house. I could walk there. And so he called me one night and he said, "Are you good at editing?" And I was like, I'm pretty good. And he's like, "I need to cut out 4 bars of this song and just take it out and move the ending closer." Meaning there was like 4 for nothing before that. He wanted to go right out of a chorus right into the verse, and there was like 4 bars of nothing before. So it took me like 10 minutes, right? And so he was like, so we got in the conversation. "Where's all your stuff?" I said, "It's all in storage." And he said, "Why don't you just bring your stuff here and you can just use the studio and we'll split the money 50-50. And I was like, "Really?" So I rented a van. I went up to the storage unit, got everything out of there. He let me kind of rewire. I put my compressor racks in. I brought my mics in. He had some beautiful, he's a jazz guitarist guy. He's been around here forever. He's from Bristol originally, but he was playing for the Merv Griffin shows down here, all the revival shows. He was in the Golden Nugget pit band for 16 years. He's like in his late 60s now. And it kind of revitalized his studio a little bit, where he was actually excited again, because he was kind of like, in his 60s, and he really wasn't seeking out work. And I started bringing some rock acts, and people, my old clients, were starting to come down and cut stuff. So I would cut everything there, bring it back here in the room I'm sitting in, and mix it on my own system, because I was more comfortable mixing here. And that went on for 2.5 years. And the Methodist diocese that owned this church decided they were going to combine that congregation with the Margay congregation and sell the church. And they sold the church and knocked it down, so the studio was closed. I sold most of my equipment to a studio that's up in Merchantville, in a lump package, like microphones, drum sets, guitar amps, all the heavy, big stuff. Wow. And I kept my I have a Warm Audio Neve clone that's 2 channels with 3-band EQ, and I have 2 Universal Audio LA610s, hardware versions, not software versions. And that's what I use here. Cut acoustic guitars and vocals, or whatever I cut in here, tambourines and stuff. And then people will send me tracks, and the songwriter Jeff Ehling that I've been working with, he'll send me a guitar and vocal on a video, and he's got really good timing, and I'll send it to my buddy Rich. He plays the drums, he brings it back to me, I send it to him. He approves it, I send it to Dave Kloss. Dave Kloss plays the bass, he sends back, and so on. I put my part. Jeff comes down and at last and sings the vocal and plays his real acoustic guitar, and then he goes home to shelf on PA, and then I mix it, and I send him mixes, and we go back and forth, a little bit higher for this, a little bit lower for this, a little more bass for that. And the only thing I don't really like about that process, I mean, my job is to make it sound like we were all in the same room, but nobody's in the same room. And if somebody does play something that's not quite exactly what the client wants, I have to call the drummer or call Dave or whatever and say, it's really cool, but he wants you to walk in the chorus. So then 2 days later, he recuts it, sends it back to me. I stick it in the mix. I send it to the client. And it's like where we were sitting in my old studio, or sitting at John's place. It was called Jam Studio One, the place in Ventnor. I would just say, "Hey, Rich, can you try going to the floor tom in the bridge instead of the ride cymbal?" And he would just do it. And the client would say, "Oh, no, I don't like that." Or, "Hey, that's great. I love that." Or "Hey, Dave, can you walk in that one part?" And the creativity in the room with the caliber of musicians, again, using these great guys for studio musicians, would make the songs better. Now it's, usually 80% of the time they nail it, and my client loves it, but not being in the same room. So that's been a little bit of a challenge, but since I moved down here, there's been less of that. I stopped playing in the hard tribute band, and I got the stagehand job in 2000, right before COVID. I started doing the stagehand stuff because of my skill set. I got into the union quickly, so I do that on weekends, and I make really good money doing that. Like a union gig, and I'm kind of at peace with that. I had a great run for 40 years and played in a million bands and did a lot of great things, met a lot of great people, worked with a lot of great people. And I'm kind of at peace that I'm not retired by any means. I'm going to be working until I'm 80. I didn't have no 401k for recording and being
No.
but I really, I was talking to a friend just recently and they were like, don't you miss the studio? And I think, yeah, but I don't miss the wedding band demos and some of the things I would do just because people would call me and I knew them and stuff. And
Right.
I would rather work with clients that were like writing some nice songs and really doing some stuff. And that I haven't really been seeking it out too much because I don't have a room to cut in. That's near, like I had when the studio down the street was happening. That was so great that I moved down here and I was like, all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I have a room, like this is great. And some people were just coming down and cutting rhythm tracks and doubling their guitars and then taking the tracks with them and then going home to their home studio and adding their vocals or adding their solos and stuff and cutting stuff that they could do with their smaller system. Sure. And then maybe tossing it back to me to mix, or sometimes they'd mix it themselves. And so that was kind of working out for a while. But after the studio closed, I kind of came to terms with I needed to find a different outlet to make a little money. And that's what happened with the stagehand thing. And I've been working on some of my own stuff occasionally. I've got a couple songs. I got one up here I hadn't listened to when I turned on this stuff just so it would look like I had something on.
That's cool. Yeah, nice.
So I hadn't listened to it like a month, and I forgot my friend Kurt had played an extra guitar track on it. He came down one Sunday afternoon and liked the song and played a couple guitar tracks on it. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm just kind of like trying to live a little bit of a different life. It's a little more chill down here. And I've come to terms with that. It's really hard to, unless you're in a lucky situation where you just, recorded a couple of those big bands and you have a name. I recorded all those bands and, there was a few with some names and I did have a reputation of doing what I did at that level that I was at that we discussed earlier. But, I don't have those big feathers in my cap, where these guys that are still making big money, like John Lorgalgi and, Joseph Puig, the big producers that are still doing stuff, Lemois and stuff like that. I never, ever got to anywhere near that level. And I always wanted to own a huge studio like KJM and, that never really because of situational stuff and money. But I've kind of come to terms that it's, it is what it is. And I had a nice run. Even my sister said to me on the phone, we were talking the other night, she's like, it's not like you didn't try. It's not like you didn't put everything you had into it, and you had a really fun. And now you've landed at the beach where I always wanted to live. If you ask any of my older friends where Joe would end up, it was the beach. And I love it here. I've got a great situation here with my landlords being terrific. My landlord's son works for NFL Films as a film and music editor, and he's a musician. Oh. And when I moved into my house, my landlord said to me, "So, are you going to take one of the bedrooms and turn it into like a mixing room like Matt has up in Pennsylvania live?" And I'm like, "Well, Jerry, I really wasn't going to tell you that, but yes, I am."
Yeah, right.
My room up that I'm sitting in, he would come up on the weekends and take pictures and send it to his son, who's in his 30s. And then Matt came down to visit, and he came up and checked out my gear. And it was just like, how cool is this? I mean, his wife, my landlady cooks me Italian dinners on Sunday. I'm like kind of family. And like I said, I love a number of my neighbors, and I'm just trying to, life you're always reinventing, and I've reinvented, and I've come to terms with some things. I never got married, and never need kids, so I don't have any of that, college tuition to pay off or anything like that. So I'm just trying to live. I'm not going to say live my best life because I hate that fucking thing, but just trying to make it happen and be happy and enjoy the beach and make some music occasionally here, make a little side money and do my thing. And it's exciting at the casinos because I get to build the stage. Like, I took apart Edgar Winter's keyboard rig at the Ringo show on Saturday night.
Wow.
I did the Sting show. I've worked with Kiss, Guns N' Roses. I don't get to meet them or anything like that, but you do get to catch the end of the if you're doing the loadout, you catch the last 3 songs before you. And if you do the load in, you're emptying trucks and building the stages and doing stuff. So it's kind of cool to see it at that real pro level that I wanted and you wanted to be at, to see what happens to make the show roll into town with 9 semis of motors and lights and trusses. Everything. It's really cool, and I'm enjoying it, even though it's physical and stuff. I lucked out. A friend of mine suggested it, and I applied at Hard Rock, and then I applied at Tropicana, and then I lucked into a job at Boardwalk Hall. So, and I'm trying to get into the more casinos that you work at, you get hired at, the more the union can staff you at. Like if there's a call at Caesars, I can't go to Caesars because I'm not a Caesars employee. But if there's a Hard Rock or Tropicana show, my union guy can call me and say, can you work Saturday, or can you work Friday, or can you work Thursday night, or whatever. So they call it being badged. So I'm trying to get badged at more casinos so I have more opportunities to work to make more money.
Nice. There's unfortunately not enough time for me to get to everything I wanted to comment on there, but I will say a couple things. One is, I'm glad you're still working on music, and a lot of this resonates with me because I've been through a lot of it in the things I do. And even though, things may not have happened in the way I wanted them to, you keep at it because you love it. And I had to self-teach a lot of what I do now, just for really financial reasons. And also I have ideas. I like to execute them. But this year's been a year of retrospection and a lot of releasing old material or never before released material. But next year, I'm working on a new album already.
Good. And
I would love it if we could get together next year sometime and you can mix it or something like that. It would be great.
Or play some keyboards on it or something. Send me the tracks and I'll play some parts or
Awesome.
You're a keyboard player there. I don't need.
I am, but that's it. I've done so many projects in the last 8 years that have been just me, that I'm just looking for more collaboration now, especially after the pandemic. It's like I want to work with people. So
yeah, I was going to say the pandemic has changed a lot of things. I've noticed that the people that I know that are getting back to playing in cover bands and doing stuff, everything's 7 to 10 now, and the bar closes at 12. Like, it's really changed the whole. There's no more. The only bar down here is in a casino or Wonder Bar on Albany Avenue that stays open till 4 o'clock in the morning, where we go have drinks after we do a show. We eat at 4 o'clock in the morning, but everything closes, in the wintertime down here, all the pizza places and whatever, they have winter hours, and if you're thinking about getting a pizza, you got to think about it like 8 o'clock on a Monday night, because they stop delivering 30 or, they're playing, so it's, but the pandemic has changed a lot of things. There's a lot of music where people are doing fantastic things with, putting together, these FaceTime or not FaceTime, but like what we're doing tonight.
The Zoom,
thing where it looks like everybody's playing and they're really faking their parts, but somebody put the song together and did it, or there's ones that like some of the established musicians did some really cool things where they have like a percussionist in Brazil, and
I've seen those,
playing guitar in San Francisco, and somebody else, and everybody's, it was really fascinating, and it was but it was a isolating time, and it was a time there was a lot of retrospective, and a lot of my decisions were made during COVID because things were so slowed down and the studio shut down, because I couldn't bring anybody into the studio, into the church. They were closed down.
Right.
I wasn't allowed to bring people in. So finally opened up a little bit. I did a few projects and then it closed. So it really did change a lot of things and made me look at my life. And as we're getting older, I forget how old you are, but I'm 62. I'm in good health, thank God. And I just want to, enjoy my life and keep in touch with my friends and continue to sit in here and mess around with some guitar ideas and keyboards and whatever, write some songs and do some things. I kind of got a little lazy creatively, but I'm feeling that like in the wintertime when it's not so beachy and you want to get out to the beach and do all this stuff and you're in the house, and I'll probably get back to like finishing this song that's up on the computer screen right now.
Well, I hope you do. And I hate to cut you off, but they're going to cut us off anyway. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for this time.
So good to see you. And
so good to see you. We got to stay in touch.
Thank you for inviting me. I feel like I'm back in the biz, for a minute.
Damn right. You never left. Take care, everybody.
Your sister to a Sundance. I took your sister to a show. On the way I caught a hazy violet glow. Took my hand and led me walking to a clearing in the trees. Then she smiled, I swear she smiled, I swear your sister smiled at me. She don't know no better. Bury me in flowers, watch me drown. Anything would be better than these violets crashing down. As that dance in the sunlight hit me kinda like a drug. I said, don't come near me. I said, don't come near me. She said, can't you see we are in love? She don't know no better. Bury me in flowers, watch me drown. Anything would be better than these violets crashing down. You say that eyesight is deceiving.